Hello, thank you very much for coming. My name is Vanessa Blyer. I am the spokesperson for the Australia Institute for Tasmania's Native Forests, and I am your MC today. Now, I would like to, of course, start with an acknowledgement of country, and I'm very pleased to deliver an acknowledgement which is recommended by our Tasmanian Aboriginal Corporation. We acknowledge Palawa Tasmanian Aborigines as the original owners of Lutruwita, Tasmania. We gather here at Nipaluna on Aboriginal land, Palawa country. We honour each of the tribes of Lutruwita who are no longer here as a result of the brutal invasion, and the Tasmanian Aboriginal community of today who remain the owners of these lands. And we pledge to support Palawa Tasmanian Aborigines to achieve truth-telling and treaty. And I would also like to sincerely welcome you on behalf of the Australia Institute to this very special event at such a pivotal time for our remaining native forests in this state and for the fauna species dependent on our native forests to live, and for the people comprising about 1% of employed Tasmanians working currently in the forestry industry in this state. Now, for those who aren't quite aware, let me tell you a little bit about the Australia Institute. The Australia Institute is the country's most influential, independent think tank, conducting research that drives the public debate. The Australia Institute's Tasmanian branch has been around since 2017, and since then its research has been critical to shaping public debate. It's worked on issues such as reforming Tasmanian's electoral laws, improving the Tasmanian Integrity Commission, revamping Tasmania's marine laws and the impact of the salmon industry, and relevantly to today, analysing the economic, climate and social impact of logging native forests. And now it is my great pleasure to welcome to the stage the Honourable Bob Debus. I'll just turn that on for you, Bob.
Thank you.
When that light flashes, just give it a press.
Good afternoon.
Now, we will be taking questions from the floor, but I thought as MC I need some privileges, right? So I've got you all to myself for the moment, Bob, if that's okay. And in preparation for today, I've read so much about you, I think I'm ready to write your biography if you'd like me to. We can talk about our royalty arrangement later. But now, as a lawyer, I'm a little bit offended about this because you studied law at the University of Sydney and you did work in the law, but not for very long. You very quickly moved to the Australian Broadcasting Authority. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, well, it's true. I didn't much enjoy practicing the law as it was at the time. And I moved into publishing and then to the ABC, where I worked in radio. It does seem there's plenty of people here who are old enough to have heard me when I was doing that. And we used to be in the slot now occupied by Philip Adams, doing rather similar things and we invented a program that you probably still hear called Background Briefing in 1980.
Yes, I'm still a fan of Background Briefing. Well, thank you. I did not know that you were the creator of that. But after working at the ABC, you very quickly moved into politics and you were always the member for Blue Mountains. What a beautiful place. Tell us a little bit about how representing the Blue Mountains influenced your approach to native forests and how we ought to treat them.
Well, you couldn't live in the Blue Mountains and not be influenced by the environment at large. I helped make it a World Heritage area, in fact, and learnt during the long time I was there to be ever more appreciative of the Australian environment. And
so it was in the 80s, wasn't it, that you first became a member of the New South Wales Parliament, and now Bob Carr was around in those days, and he was the Minister for the Environment when you first entered the New South Wales Parliament. Tell us a bit about what he did for our native forests and how that impacted on you and when you later became the Environment Minister in New South Wales.
Well, he began the process of moving high conservation value land out of state forest tenure and into national parks. His work was concentrated especially in the southeast corner of New South Wales, and then when he came back a few years later as Premier, and a little while after that I became the Minister for Environment, we continued that process of portion by portion of the state, trying to establishing a new kind of settlement in which high conservation land was moved from state forest to national park. I guess overall during those years we created about 1.7 million hectares of national park, and about half of that was forest. Can I just say too that Bob Carr's wife Helena, who was greatly loved by those of us who were in that very broad family, died recently, and as we speak there's a ceremony for her in Sydney, and I pay my respects to her.
Thank you, and yes, I'm sure we join you in sending our best wishes. Now, one of what I identified as your greatest achievements when you were Minister for the Environment, you implemented an already established legislative regime to vest ownership and management of national parks in traditional owners. Why was that so important to you? And is your work still relevant in New South Wales today?
Sure. We had a process that was established before I became Minister. It was policy of that government to transfer national park to the ownership of traditional Aboriginal owners who then leased it back to the Park Service but remained in ownership, and the Park Service of course could only carry out the management in consultation with them. At first we tried to find traditional owners in a kind of anthropological sense. We tried to identify people who had clan associations going back through many generations to that particular land, and we found that didn't work particularly well. It was far better to work with people who were identified in the present time, not excluding people who had the longer association, but not to pay more attention to strong ethical attachment now. And we transferred a number of very significant places, Mootawinji outside Broken Hill, and a wonderful place called Mount Gooliga near Narooma on the south coast of Sydney, as for instance.
And you are also the Minister for Emergency Services during your tenure in the New South Wales Parliament. So no doubt that allowed you to become informed about bushfire management. How did your work in bushfire management and your work with traditional owners meet? For example, was any attention paid to cultural burning, or cool burning as we call it sometimes these days?
I think it would be fair to say that 20 years ago, and that's what we're talking about, there was far less recognition of the significance of cultural burning than there is now. Far less. On the other hand, before I forget it, let me point out that through most of the time that I was in office, nobody talked about climate change either. Okay. 2006 is really when people began to talk about it. I was nearly gone by then. So, but I was always proud that the National Parks and Wildlife Service of New South Wales had a really, really high number of Aboriginal people working for it. And in the Western Division, in the early 2000s, the Western Division of the state, actually a majority of the workforce were Aboriginal, and some of the regional managers were as well. So we felt pleased about that.
Yeah, no, and I'm pleased to hear it. Now, you've been hot in the press lately, Bob, if I do say so myself, and deservedly so, I think. I enjoyed reading an article that you published in September this year. It's titled, "A Good Start to Urgent Climate Change Abatement, End Native Forest Logging Now." And in that article, you tell us that the idea of balance is no longer effective, that we must accept that the repair and improvement of the environment needs to have primacy over all other social and economic considerations. And you talk about retraining. Now, it's not controversial that the taxpayers heavily subsidise the native forest logging industry in this state, and to the tune of a lot of money.
And every state.
And every state. And so it'd be a good idea, no doubt, for some of that taxpayers' money to be reallocated to reskilling those members of our community who make a living from the logging industry. And so what about restoration? Should we be, if you're talking about we need to actually improve the environment arising from the damage that we've caused it, should we be reskilling in restoration?
Absolutely. I mean, it's pretty commonsensical, isn't it? We have there's some people in this audience who are old enough to remember, as I do, the great World Environment Conference in Rio in 1992, when a new idea was coined. It was called sustainable development, and it was pretty damn radical at the time, and the idea was that you had to balance environmental concerns with social and economic concerns. In 1992, that was a really radical idea, and various programs and United Nations enterprises followed from it. But the real truth is that the idea of sustainable development has not sustained the environment. The environment's got manifestly more damaged. You can look at official reports, or you can use your eyes. The environment has continued to decline. There's massive levels of extinction and near extinction amongst native species. Climate change hangs like a pall over us all. So the idea, which is yet another, we always have to coin phrases. There's now the idea of so-called nature positive, which could just become another mechanism for greenwashing, but nevertheless could be very useful insofar as it suggests that the environment can no longer be successfully managed, as it were, cannot be sustained by an idea of balancing out various economic considerations against environmental considerations. We actually have to restore the environment, and there is no choice if we wish to, change the trajectory of human development. We have got to do that. Can I just mention that today, as I was on the bus coming in, I saw an article in the Guardian. People can see it when they get home. It's written by somebody called Patrick Greenfield, and the heading is "Let Forests Grow Old to Store Huge Volume of Carbon." By allowing existing trees to grow old in healthy ecosystems and restoring degraded areas, scientists say 226 gigatons of carbon could be sequestered, equivalent to nearly 50 years of US emissions. But they caution that mass monoculture tree planting and offsetting will not help forests realise their potential. So there's literally hundreds of scientists around the world who produced a report that is in the journal Nature, so it's been peer-reviewed to death today, which just says you've got to restore forests, and you've got to protect the ones that are there if you're going to have any hope of actually meeting the necessary abatement of greenhouse gas that will perhaps reverse the present trajectories.
And speaking of The Guardian, I read an article yesterday where you and a number of other former ministers for the environment across the country have gotten together and called for an end to native forest logging, not in Tasmania alone, but across the whole country.
Yeah.
How did this come about? Are more people going to join in with you? And what do you want to achieve from it? Aside from an end to native forest logging, how is that going to benefit?
It's, I suppose I'm here to indulge myself a little bit. If I talk about my history, I got to remind an audience like this that actually there have been lots of people in politics who have had a reasonably good posture towards the environment and have in fact supported reductions and potentially an end to native forest logging for the last 30 years. That pledge that you mentioned that was signed yesterday was also signed by Jeff Gull, the former Premier of Western Australia, who took a large section of native forest out of production when he was in office. Peter Beattie, I could mention Bob Carr, we have already mentioned. And so that pledge yesterday was signed by a bunch of former environment ministers, including some from Queensland, Labor ministers, but also Robert Hill. So it's worth remembering, I guess, especially if you're in Tasmania, that there's a degree of multi-partisanship about these ideas. A degree. I'm not saying that there are unanimous opinions, quite obviously, but there is a degree of understanding right across the political spectrum that it's about time we just recognise that native forest logging has reached its economic and environmental limits, and that I'm sorry. I'm saying we need to recognise. I'm getting stories. We need to recognise that native forest logging has reached its environmental and economic limits. It's beyond them, and that it is merely rational to arrange for it now to end. It's crucial, of course, that you should look after workers and companies that are in the area. Of course it is. I can say that long ago now, when we were working on these matters in New South Wales, we were meticulous in that regard, just meticulous. We did area by area what is possible now to do state by state. There's maybe 1,000 people directly engaged in native forest logging in Tasmania. It might be a bit more. About the same in Victoria. Those numbers are so small that you can curate transition arrangements for individuals. You can make arrangements for redundancy and retraining and giving people assistance in moving, as well, of course, as assisting in the development of engineering wood products and growing plantations and all those kinds of things. Sometimes it seems likely that people think that it's very hard to do that. My assertion would be it's been the bread and butter of governments to do that at various times in various states over the last 30 years. And it is not even by many comparisons, it's not even a hard thing to pay for. The amount that the Victorians and the West Australians have put aside for specific transition arrangements that are going to come into effect from the beginning of next year is, one of them put aside $80 million, one of them put aside $120 million. Many other kinds of expenditures that they would have made on plantations, that kind of thing. But these amounts of money are enormous if you compare them to the family budget. But in terms of government expenditures, they're not much. They are affordable. and you can be done and dusted, and you can have a whole bunch of national parks that continue to contribute to the sequestration of carbon. I gave the example of the scientists writing that paper that's published today. These forests will do nothing but continue to sequester carbon over the next 30 years. So it's going to be particularly crucial. And we know that the biggest trees sequester the most. We know that forests with high levels of integrity sequester the most. If a monoculture, a plantation, would be lucky to sequester half as much carbon as a well-developed native forest, which will go on sequestering more and more so long as we leave it alone. Now, as I said, back in 2006, we didn't even think about carbon sequestration. We thought about other reasons for beginning the transition. But now, it's of overwhelming importance. And, while I'm on this hobby horse, an enormous amount of time and treasure is invested in trying to find schemes or mechanisms for artificial carbon capture and storage. They nearly all fail, and none of them work very well. But forests are fantastic. All you've got to do is leave them alone.
Speaking of Western Australia and Victoria, both of those states have promised to end native forest logging from the beginning of January 2024, and neither of those states attached a market mechanism to the end to native forest logging. Why is it important in Tasmania that we stop logging our remaining native forests without using carbon credits for new coal and gas?
Well, my very strong view is that carbon offsets have far past their use by date. There was a time 20 years ago when they served some kind of purpose, perhaps in supporting quick transition from one kind of production to another. But here I'm relying on great masses of scholarship. I'm not making this up. Carbon offsets work kind of like a leaf blower. They just push it from one place to another. The way they're designed is that if one person can keep on pumping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere for all they're worth because someone else is taking it out. Again, 30, 40, 50 years ago, it might have been good that at least someone was taking carbon out of the atmosphere. But now, we need everyone to do it. It's not a question of offsetting one against the other. Everybody's got to do it. And if it's worse than that, because there are more elements to it. If you have carbon offsets, carbon market, carbon credits, for instance, in the native forest context, then the people that are most likely to buy the credits are fossil fuel companies. Some other people can buy them, maybe some well-off philanthropists will buy some. But you should make no mistake, the fossil fuel companies have got more money than the rest of the world combined, and they'll force up the price and they will buy them. And so what this kind of scheme now does is help perpetuate the fossil fuel industry. And there are some carbon offset schemes actually that where people get paid for just reducing logging, not for stopping it, but just doing it less. And what those schemes do is perpetuate both the native forest industry and the fossil fuel companies. So, in principle, I find myself completely opposed to the continued use of offsets. But in practice also, it's really hard to design schemes that have got any integrity. All over the world at the moment, we have seen examples, sometimes quite, massive, scandalous examples of carbon offset schemes that don't work. Carbon offset schemes that turn out to be almost or actually fraudulent. Because if it's going to have integrity, you have to have a number of qualities. The scheme has to have some kind of a baseline. It has to have something against which you measure the action you've taken for which you're being credited. It has to have permanence. It's got to last a long time. And there can't be any leakage from the scheme. That's to say, it's got to have consistent operating principles. And, well, you certainly can't have much of a carbon market for offsets in Australia if Tasmania is sending logs on the ferry to Victoria, or New South Wales is sending logs on trucks to Victoria. And many people will be familiar with the kind of criticisms that have been persistently made over the last few years about a number of the carbon credit arrangements that already exist with our clean energy regulator. And frankly, a lot of criticism hasn't really been answered. The fact is, it's tremendously hard to have a scheme that has integrity. It's tremendously easy for people to try and warp them. It's just some people engage in them are very well meaning, but many people engage in them just the same as people trading in financial derivatives.
And there's a research paper just published, authored by Andrew McConey for the Australia Institute, which you can find on the Australia Institute's website, which I encourage you all to engage with, which explains why one market mechanism, for example, Australian carbon credit units, is economically nonsensical to solve a dying market, being the native forest logging industry. So I recommend that report to you all. So, Bob, can we do it? Can government in Tasmania, can all pockets of the Tasmanian community work together and successfully bring an end to native forest soon?
Well, look, I don't speak.
The answer's yes, right?
I don't speak for the people of Tasmania, let alone its government, but is it possible? Of course it is.
Thank you. And look, without further ado, we welcome your questions for Bob.
I did promise the first question to Bersha. Has she gone?
No, I'm here.
Ah.
Well, I wasn't going to ask one, but if you insist. Okay, well, I have a little bit of a nerdy question then, because I've been thinking about these offsets, because we're about to host a congress at Mona on forest economics. And so, of course, offsets are one of the first things that comes up. So I see how in a place like Tasmania, with a stable government, or Australia as a whole, I see how you can structure things in such a way, in accordance with the new report, that you don't need them. I can see that. But my question is, how do you deal with the Amazon and the Congo, since it's a global issue? I think my question is the word market mechanism alone flawed? So is there something other than an offset, other than a leaf blower? Because that makes sense. You can't just leaf blow anymore. What incentivizes a cattle rancher with control over vast swaths of Amazon, or a general in the Congo who has no kind of checks and balances to leave the forest intact? What kind of force, which I imagine might be a market mechanism, which is not offsets, could we look to?
Okay, it's a fair question. I should mention that there has for quite a long time now, a number of, I think 20 years, been an international scheme which is referred to by the acronym RED, R-E-D-D, and there was some more, the scheme was elaborated, and it was called RED Plus, and it involves a form of offsetting and the schemes financed by enlightened places like Norway. But at very regular intervals, you see in the media reports of hopeless cock-ups with RED schemes. But again, it's about the difficulty of policing them, it's about the difficulty of the near impossibility of running schemes on a voluntary basis that continue to have integrity, because people are constantly tempted to make some more money. It's sometimes the middle people that are doing it too. It's not the government, it's not decent philanthropists, it's the brokers in the middle. There's one, I have no expertise in this, but there's a big organisation called FERA, who are certifiers for a great many of the RED schemes around the world. And just in the last 6 months, there have been some really serious investigations of the kind of schemes that they've set up and approved, and conclusions, according to some reports, that 90% of their schemes are just junk. So, yeah, the problem happens at 2 levels, the implementation and the concept. Nevertheless, it's entirely opposite to ask what can we do about cattle ranches and crooked military in Brazil. And my tentative answer is that you can't avoid a political solution. You just can't avoid it. So you get a better government in Brazil and get some control over it. When the man, President Lula, is there, the exploitation or the damage to the Amazon is reduced. And I just think we need a couple more Lulas.
Excuse me. Hi, thanks for having us here today. I run a tech company that services the agriculture industry and including forestry. I was down south a couple of weeks ago doing an inspection on a property that's currently for sale in native forest here in Tasmania. Big one. And well, I suppose not my question, but my thought, how can a property that size, nearly 1,000 hectares, be sold for the price of a luxury home in a capital city in Australia? Thank you.
That is the offer, isn't it? Because they're offering the timber. Yeah.
Yeah, the comments, I suppose, were the land is worth nothing, which I understand timber is the value for certain buyers, but 1,000 hectares of land on a planet still should have some value, you would imagine. And for 1,000 hectares of native forest to be sold for the price of a luxury home in any capital city in Australia, I think it's just wild.
Well, I agree with that. Yeah, this is private land. I haven't been so radical as to suggest the abolition of all markets.
The microphone is playing up, but please
My name's Maria, and we protest against logging in front of Parliament regularly. Just wondering, if you have any knowledge of the fact that the Tasmanian timber industry does not have FSC, which is the highest certification for forests. And it has tried to do it a couple of times, and I think the last time was 2017, failed. Why is it not going for the highest certification, considering as we were driving here, a logging truck with 3 separate areas had a massive logs on it. So that would not happen under FSC. Can we demand that the government at least goes for FSC? That's both parties, not just one, because they're both as bad as each other.
Well, it's a conundrum, isn't it? Because the better reassert, I am not claiming expertise in the details of Tasmanian politics or economics. Okay? But I have heard that there's been logging right through habitats with parrots. And when an auditor for whatever the organisation is that certifies FSG saw that, it wouldn't agree with it. Well, in New South Wales at the moment, we are engaged in a quite substantial quarrel with the Forestry Corporation because it appears to the organisation that I'm part of that they are flagrantly ignoring existing rules, existing regulations about the protection of habitat trees for gliders. And we gradually realised that they don't much care. So
We don't have the same rules. We don't have rules.
I'm not sure about that. You might.
G'day, Bob. My name's Victor Bailey. I'm the local member for Parliament for the Tasmanian Greens, and thank you for coming down to the Australian Institute for putting this on. And commendations for your article and your stance and your leadership when it comes to native forests and teaming up with past colleagues and indeed even a former Liberal Environment Minister, Robert Hill. I guess the question for me is, I agree we can and we will protect our forests here in Tasmania, we can and we will do it without offsets, but the biggest Tory chestnut has always been the race to the bottom for the major parties here in terms of who can support the resource industries the most and who is the most rigid and unmovable supporter. And I guess as someone from inside the Labor movement, I guess what advice do you have for us here in terms of how do we cut through that? It's Labor premiers in those other states that have moved to end native forest logging, in Dan Andrews and Jeff Gallup and so forth, but what advice do you have for us here?
Tell us what to do.
The answer is not a lot. I mean, the Labor Party, like the Liberal Party, which I know very little about, it is actually a federal organisation. It's like there are distinct differences from state to state, and those differences reflect a lot about the nature of the community that is represented. So I don't have any specific advice about what you should do. I can only say that there's every advantage in attempting to work for a consensus, protesting when you asked, but working for a consensus which deals in each case with people's genuine concerns. Okay? So a concern about the circumstances of workers is a serious one. Absolutely, of course it is. And I am suggesting that the numbers of workers involved are so small. Someone told me the other day the number of workers in the Tasmanian native forest industry is 1/3 of the number of people who work at the hospital, at the road. So everything should be done to reassure those sections of the community that are worried in that economic sense. But there's also often, always, in my experience, there's a kind of a cultural war that goes on. It's a kind of some people just feel as if, I don't know, it's a question of identity politics, or it's a question of what my grandparents did when they cut down trees in the Styx Valley, or and that is a problem that's much harder to deal with. But I think I would be intruding if I suggested to you precisely how you should deal with that.
Hi, my name is Ali. I'm just a concerned resident of Tasmania. Greenwashing is probably one of our biggest threats at the moment. There's serious systemic change that's required. We're sitting on, 100% renewable energy laurels, and that's all thanks to our native forests, let's be frank. And they continue to be cleared out of law at ridiculous rates. How are we going to get change when the people in power who are supposed to be environment ministers don't care about the environment and look at everything through the lens of money and economics? If we don't have basic respect for the natural environment which we are a part of, and we think we're the top of the food chain, how can we get any sort of change in this entire field?
Why don't you ask a hard question? Look, these, I just got to have a guess, okay? Like, I don't know any more than you do. But when I think back, the difference in societal attitudes between now and 30 years ago is enormous. Just enormous. 30 years ago, we used to think that having 4% of a jurisdiction in a national park was really good. 4%. Now there's an international agreement adopted by Australia that we should have 30% of our land and sea in national park. By the way, I don't know how you ever do that unless you stop logging in native forest. So a huge change has happened. Okay. There are very strong differences between people in political parties as well as between political parties. But I do regret that there's not more activism. I see certain prominent activists over on that side of the road, and I think, we just...
And he still gets thrown in jail.
Yes, well, I have got no idea why governments think it's okay to pass the anti-demonstration laws they passed. It's like everyone's passed into a different sphere. I don't know what, I grew up believing certain things about civil rights and what have you, and nobody is paying any attention. But add some more activism, some more scholarship, some more of people like yourself doing what you're doing, will continue to change things. It's not, there's no cause to feel completely hopeless. There's cause for alarm.
Okay, we've got time for three more questions if we make them quick. And lots of people have up their hand, but I know there was a lady over there that's been asking for a while. So I'm going to take two ladies there and one more person from this side. Someone had their hand up. Okay. Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm just lady here. Okay. You can start.
Hi, yeah, sure. Hi, my name is Jenny. I'm a beekeeper and I don't like our forests. Yeah, is it? Okay. And I don't like our forests down south to make my living. I spoke to beekeepers today who are down there delivering bees to the forests that this government keeps logging. I've listened to what you've said about restoration. I've listened to what Vicar has said about cut through and the other gentleman as well. It's really important that we start to frame this differently and start to consider the government agriculture white paper that they have. At the moment, it's a $10 billion 2050 agri-vision target. Without these, it won't happen. So my question to you, Bob, is do we start to frame this now, excuse me, beyond just forestry? Because we have a 1 in 2 literacy rate here. Governments love to wedge people on 5th generation loggers, and let's just keep doing that. Is it time to start reframing with the restoration, with an agricultural vision beyond forestry?
I'm sure it is. We've said several times that hardly anyone is employed in the forest industry anymore. It's merely sensible to think of the environment of Tasmania as a whole. But you can't get away from the fact that the preservation and restoration of the forests is absolutely necessary. It's not an option. Though many other things can be treated as relevant. I really like that honey from Little.
Well, it's going to be killed. We've got no stands left. This is what's happening.
Well, that's a separate matter, and I'm prepared to go to war about that.
Huon Valley, in the southern forests down there, which are coming under constant attack from unsustainable timbers, Tasmania. This is very much carried on from what Maria and Vicar asked earlier, in that we're struggling to find a way forward. The two major parties in Tasmania have no political will to end native forest or even to reform forestry in the slightest. In fact, as Vicar said, they're just double down. There's so much misinformation out about this as well. It's still seen as being a major employee, because the numbers are hidden in this overall category of agriculture and forestry. You can separate it out, it's not easy to find. It doesn't matter how much I try to put it out there, it gets ignored. People think that without native forestry, we won't have timber to build houses, when almost none of our native forest goes into actual structural grade timber now. Years ago, when Tasmania faced this sort of a problem with the Franklin Dam, it ended up being sorted at federal level. Is that our only recourse now, to actually force change from the federal area to actually come and to intervene in Tasmania to get this sorted, or can we force a referendum in Tasmania or citizen juries or something? Because I'm 100% certain if we had asked everybody in Tasmania and gave them the right information, they would say, let's end it now. We can't get that because the mantra is jobs, 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 as if native forestry actually provides jobs.
Well, look, I've nothing to add except that we all have to go on doing the things that we have always done to circulate information and to take actions and to try and sort through the politics of the business. There's no simple answers. But you would be not unreasonable to be seeking some support from movements and government on the mainland and federal government.
Well, thank you everyone for your questions. Now, I'd like to take the opportunity to tell you about the Australia Institute's next event in Tasmania. It's not too late to get a ticket. It's the Tasmanian Ocean Summit. It's on this Friday, and information about the Ocean Summit's available at the door, just to your right on exit. And of course, you can also find information about it on the Australia Institute's website. And we nearly have 3,000 signatures on our open letter to Premier Rockcliffe to end native forest logging in Tasmania. Please help us reach on that number. You can do it. So you can also find the petition on the Australia Institute's website. Thank you very much, Bob Debus, for travelling to the beautiful state that is Tasmania to be with us today. And thank you deeply for your advocacy towards ending native forest logging, which we must achieve now. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Visit australiainstitute.org.au for all our latest research, commentary and analysis, as well as details for upcoming events and webinars.